A tragedy has occurred.
Which started right here with the taxation of trade routes and has now engulfed our entire planet in the oppression of the Trade Federation.
We have a massive amount to cover today, ladies and gentlemen. First off, there is an open beta, as you might already know, coming in the new year. That open beta should have quite a bit of experimentation. We may be seeing changes to the pop system, moving to a more Victoria 3 style pop system. I know, it sounds crazy. And on top of that, changes to the trade system. But that isn't all, ladies and gentlemen. We're also going to be looking at the game director's thoughts on biological and psionic ascension remastery, something that is currently a top priority, changes to the warfare system, biological ships, factions and politics, changes to espionage, playable nomads, piracy, crime, species packs, Stellaris, scenarios, and possibly even more. Make sure you are comfortable, you've got something to drink, something to eat, maybe a snack, and let's dive in. There is a big red disclaimer on everything we're going to go through now. The disclaimer is not everything the game director talks about is going to be viable or going to happen. But given that we, the community, have been very open with the developers, he feels it's only fair to return the favor and be open with us. Let's start with the information in Developer Diary 363 then. Some of the questions that the game director offered as proposals were a bit leading. He wanted to know what we all thought about the existing pop mechanics, for example, because he is very interested in improving their performance. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, improving pop performance, one of the main issues for late game lag. If you know anything about Stellaris, you know how true that is. As well as addressing several other quality of life and mechanical issues with the current systems. Our responses have strengthened the game director's belief that tackling and reworking planets is a correct course of action, and we should all expect some experimentation in next year's open beta. For those of you that don't know, we're not going to be getting a new patch come the new year in Q1 as we previously had since the developers released patch 3.1, since we had the LEM update. We're no longer on that 4 patches a year cycle. Instead, we're going to have another big patch coming out in May with the next anniversary of the game, which in previous years was also followed by that year's major expansion DLC. So what could be coming in this open beta we're going to get in the new year? Well, let's dive in further. The game director would like us to move over to a system more similar to the pop groups used in Victoria 3, though with a Stellaris spin on things. We are not likely to go as deep in the simulation as Victoria 3 does, but the game director thinks that we can likely split pop groups based on species, ethics, and factions. Some of the granularity we have right now may slip through. So the game director Eladrin is eager to get to doing some prototyping and finding out what the pros and cons of such a change are, as well as what the performance implications would be. Needless to say, the economic implications will be huge. Now, I'm very excited. I have really wanted to see something like a Victoria 3 pop system in Stellaris since I got my hands on Victoria 3 a couple of years ago. I think it could offer a lot more depth, and if we could kind of get away with a lot of what we currently have now with pop representations, I would be hopeful performance would be better. At the moment, every pop is basically an object. It has to be represented in the game. So when we get to late game and we have hundreds, if not thousands of pops in the dozens of empires out there in the galaxy, that can cause a large decrease in performance. Personally, I didn't think we could see a rework on this level until we got to Stellaris 2, if that ever happens. So the fact that developers, the fact that game director himself is talking about implementing a change like this, I think is massive. I think this could have a big impact on the ability of the game in the future to show off things like factions, to show off different ethical groups, different choices, different basically groups like we have in Victoria 3, different strata of population with different jobs representing different points of view as well, down on quite a fine level, breaking into that thing. We could also then see some sort of internal politics update, something like we were promised way back in the beginning, with different sectors having different political alignments. Lots of crazy things could be shoehorned in after this kind of change. What else might we see in the open beta? Well, trade is apparently almost certainly going to change. At the moment, the trade system is a little bit complicated, and I did cover this in a previous video, but I think it lacks some depth in certain areas whilst also having some needless complexity. And as any developer knows, we should try and make systems without needless complexity. How does it work at the moment? Well, planets produce trade value, and then you have to collect all of that trade value at your capital via starbases, which then have to have trade routes from that starbase going back to your capital planet. You can use bypasses to get it there faster, and you also may need to get some piracy suppression to stop piracy events popping up that could reduce incoming trade value. Once you've collected all of this trade value, depending on your empire's policy, you can then turn it either into energy credits or energy credits and consumer goods or unity or basic resources. There are lots of different things you can do with it, but at the end of the day, it's a bit weird. We don't really have proper trade routes or supply lines or anything like that. Very few members of the community seem terribly fond of the current system. And it's both terribly bad for performance, because all of those routes to the capital need to be worked out, and they're constantly being worked out. It's quite a drag, I'm told. And also, I think if you've played any multiplayer, you'll probably know that we often get a trade route bug where you'll get a desync based on trade routes. That can happen quite a lot, actually. Now, the other part is it's mechanically difficult for newer players to understand. It's quite complicated to know which buttons are which, what you actually need to do, and especially when you conquer new territory, you then have to set up all of these new trade routes. Even I, a very seasoned player, I've got over 6,500 hours, consistently forget to reset new trade routes when I have conquered new territory, new starbases, so that's super annoying. While the game director likes the general idea behind the trade routes, he doesn't think they add enough benefit for their costs. The developers are likely to revamp it into a proper resource. This basically kills off your ability, if it becomes a proper resource, to set up trade planets on low habitability planets, because at the moment, habitability only impacts your resource output. It doesn't impact your trade value output. So that would nerf trade to some degree if they make it into a resource. The developers are also considering ways of using it to simulate actual supply lines and local planetary deficits. If they could end up pursuing the latter, Gestalt empires would need to access trade, or at least something similar, maybe call it logistics. That could potentially open up more opportunities for megacorps and diplomatic pacts, and they'll have to find a new way of using pirates. Now, something I think I would really like to see in Stellaris is logistical trade route systems. For example, let's say we have an empire where the western side has lots of agricultural planets, ooh, gross farmers, I know, but bear with me, lots of farming planets, and the eastern side has lots of consumer goods planets, lots of industrial centers, but no farming. A tactical empire could come in and blockade that logistical trade route, let's say, and that would mean the western side suddenly get a consumer goods deficit on those planets that had cut off from their source of consumer goods, and the eastern side would get a food deficit because they're cut off from their source of food in the west. That would open up some very strategic decisions that you could make in order to cripple an enemy empire without actually fighting them in space, without landing on their planets, simply blockading trade routes. Look, all I'm saying is I want to do the Phantom Menace in Stellaris, alright? Is it too much to ask? No, I don't think so. Anyway, moving on. Actually, before we do move on, I just briefly want to say that means we could possibly have a system where you could have trade routes flowing through other empires that could then tax your trade routes. Yes, we could have taxation of trade routes. That could have implications in the galactic community. There could be proposals in the Senate. There could be, votes of no confidence. I don't know. Maybe we could elect a strong Supreme Chancellor. Anyway, I'm digressing. Let's move on. So trade and a new pop system look likely to be in the open beta coming out in the new year. But what about those pie-in-the-sky ideas? What about the things that won't be in the open beta, but the devs think are possibilities and want to explore? What about the infinite frontiers of Stellaris? Now, again, I need to mention the big red disclaimer on this. Everything we're about to go through now is not intended as a timeline or a list of promises, but an open discussion about things the game director considers possibilities and why they are possibilities. This is very much the future of Stellaris, but Stellaris does have many possible futures. And if you're enjoying this video, please explore the possibilities of that like button. We're going to come out of the gate swinging here with quite a big topic: biological and psionic ascension. First things first, the game director strongly believes that remastering the remaining ascension paths is a top priority. We're not saying reworking, we're saying remastering, which I think is a very interesting choice of words. The Machine Age dramatically improved both cybernetic and synthetic ascensions and gave machine empires proper ascension choices. Possibly the strongest ascension choices in the game, but that's by the by. It did, however, leave the others behind. For example, biological ascension isn't in a good state right now mechanically or as an overall experience. It's basically a crap version of the modularity ascension synthetic empires get access to with much worse traits. It's honestly just garbage at the moment. To be quite frank, I personally believe that biological ascension right now is probably worse than if you were to take, xenocompatibility along with innate design. Basically giving you some bonuses at the start of the game and then some extra pop growth speed later on. Overall, I think that's probably quite equivalent to actually biologically ascending, given you don't really get very many good traits. Psionic Ascension is better off as it is affected tangentially by most content releases, but it is a bit too reliant on random events and luck. The Shroud is very luck-based. This leads me to believe if they're remastering it, they might be getting rid of some of the luck side of things, which could be very interesting. Psionic at the moment is still very strong. You're getting lots of resource output from jobs bonuses from your psionic workers, your telepaths, alongside getting a covenant with a Shroud entity that can give you some more great bonuses. And those telepaths can be placed on every single planet, which has 25 pops or more, and the upgraded capital building. So overall, Psionic isn't bad, but it's definitely worse than, let's say, synthetically ascending and then going for a modular or virtual existence. I know it's not full virtual, ladies and gentlemen, but it is still the best way of synthetically ascending because you do get that amazing policy. Both of these ascensions will be revamped. That is the biological and psionic ascension. That is being stated here plainly. Though since they are very distinct from one another, the game director intends on having them focused on in two separate releases. So what I'm hearing here is that we are going to get two distinct releases where we have a rework to the biological and psionic ascension paths. That is massive news. We don't know when it's coming, but it is coming. Let's hope it comes sooner rather than later though, because biological really needs some help. What about warfare and war resolution? I did wax lyrical in a recent video about the warfare system in Stellaris and how I kind of thought it was clunky and crap at the moment, and I'd love to see a rework there. Well, ladies and gentlemen, fear not, the game director has some information for us. At some point in the future, so that does sound a little cagey, we don't know when this is going to happen, but at some point, the game director would like to see us revisit war and war resolution, and then enable more of the scenarios that occur in the Stellaris cinematic universe of their trailers to actually happen in the game. For example, when the Gamma aliens attacked the United Nations of Earth colony on Europa 7, the Commonwealth of Man did not patiently wait by for an invitation to war before summoning the apocalypse. Humanity was threatened and they acted. More fluid rules around joining and leaving wars are needed if we want to, create those kinds of scenarios in the actual game. And betrayal is not supported to the satisfaction of the game director. Backstabbing should be possible, especially during a war. That kind of sounds a little scary, actually. I'm feeling unsafe. Secret fealty does exist, the game director points out here, but he doesn't find it enough in its current state. Other mechanics currently prevent them from seizing the initiative and gaining their freedom at what would be the most opportune moments, like when their overlord is possibly losing a war or something of the sort. Personally, I have said this before, but I'll say it again. I think some kind of system similar to EU4 system would be just better. Being able to call in allies after a war has started, that would be excellent. Being able to join a war because, you know, some great powers out there are fighting and you're also a great power, so heck, I'm going to be in there too. That would be awesome. Basically, I'd just take the EU4 war system over the current Stellaris system any day of the week, and yeah, that's all I have to say on that note. What about biological ships? Well, the developers have confirmed weeks ago, maybe it was even months now, that we are going to be getting actual biological ships, which are more complicated than just the mutated space fauna we currently have that was added with the Grand Archive story pack. The game director feels that it's not the same fantasy as true bioships, meat ships we grow ourselves and stand inside of. These are the vessels that your people grow and fly around in, or that have more symbiotic relationships with their pilots. I especially like the fantasy of those biological mercenary warships in the Zeely sequence, the ones the humans can get a lift in, fly around in, and they're basically giant space whales that you fly around on the inside and they rent themselves out as mercenaries. That would be awesome. That's my bioship fantasy. Let me know what yours is down in the comments below. I'd love to hear about it. But a proper system would pair very nicely alongside biological ascension, is what the game director is saying. I think it's not written here, but the words hint hint look like they might as well be plastered in bold red text. So what I believe the game director is saying is that they want to have a rework to biological ascension, a remastering, and at the same time bring in biological ships with that. Possibly that could mean biological ships would be part of the bio-ascension path, so once you biologically ascend you can do away with, you know, those machine ships, and instead you can have actual bio ships flying around that you grow yourself. That would be kind of interesting, pretty cool. Overall though, this is a fantasy a lot of people have wanted for a while, and it sounds like we're going to be getting it hopefully sooner rather than later, especially given the fact that earlier the game director did say that reworking those ascension paths is a top priority, and I assume they have top men on the job. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to say what could be considered a dirty word on the Stellaris official Discord server, and that is internal politics. Factions and politics are apparently going to be changing. Governments in Stellaris may hold a grudge against you for centuries for your atrocities, but pops and factions are very quick to forgive and forget. Currently, there are no revanchist or irredentist factions that make trouble when your borders change, nor actual variety within the factions themselves. Every empire, basically, depending on your ethics, will get access to the same set of factions, and that's boring. We would like to see factions that have their own tenets and goals and different ways that you can then deal with them. There have been a lot of calls for an internal politics expansion. Hi, I've also called for that. That's me too. Yeah, sorry about that. Yep. But the game director thinks that it would be really politics and culture in general affecting both your empires and those around you. Some sort of culture system would be awesome. I could see this tying in really easily with a Victoria 3 style pop rework. Oh my goodness me, I could see it possible, ladies and gentlemen. I am getting very excited just reading this. If the developers were to do something along those lines, they'd also want to add some variant of factions to Gestalt empires. Maybe instincts for hives that grow more dominant based on your behavior, or directives that compete for priority in a machine intelligence. They'd have to feel different from individualistic factions, however. And then among individualistic factions, the developers could see the tenets of an egalitarian faction from a shared burdens empire being very different from the egalitarian faction in a non-worker cooperative megacorp. Yes, those would be very different indeed. I'm guessing shared burdens would be, well, let's all do the labor together equally, and in the megacorp, the egalitarian might be something more along the lines of, we all should equally have the right to buy things. Very different tenets indeed. These tenets might also be used to define the beliefs of your spiritualist faction. Whoa, hold up. That could mean we could get some sort of rework to spiritualism, possibly with an actual religion system, maybe. I mean, that I'm really pushing the boat out here, but maybe that could be pushed in alongside this update, wow. If there's anything I'm excited about in the future, a rework to politics in this game would be it for me. I think getting internal politics, culture, religion, politics in general, getting an update, feeling like we have actual political parties with actual political movements that change and grow and collapse over time would be amazing. Getting sectors that drift away from the core politics of your empire and then want independence, especially when you're a very wide empire, would be amazing. It was something we were promised right back at the start of the game when it was released. It was in the vision plan, but it kind of died a death a long while ago. The developer would also like to explore spreading your factions into other empires. I think that could be similar to the Victoria 3 system, possibly. They have a blueprint there already. There is a system for doing that. It's not, I think, perfect in Victoria 3, but it does exist. I'm not sure I'd like that system specifically, but the idea of having politics and culture and belief being a big impact on not just your empire, but the empires around you, wow, that would really fulfill quite a few roleplay fantasies of mine and kind of fantasies about Stellaris being a galaxy simulator. Espionage was introduced with the Nemesis DLC. I want to say it was called Nemesis. Yes, it was called Nemesis, wasn't it? Stellaris Nemesis, yeah. Now, that system, as it is currently, is not very satisfying. As Mr. Cosmogon reminds Eladrin, the game director, every design meeting. And I'd like to second that. The system's kind of a bit meh. You can mostly entirely ignore espionage. It's great to get intel on other empires, to know about their military weights, to know where their fleets are, that sort of thing. But overall, it doesn't really have that much impact outside of the intel system. It is difficult to keep track of spy networks. They are generally low impact, and they are no real counterplays. But Mr. Cosmogon has got schemes, apparently. I tell you what I'd like to see here. So basically what we're saying is espionage is going to get looked at somehow, but we don't know how. If anyone tried out that Nexus 5X game, briefly it was called Stellaris Nexus. It's like a board game version of Twilight Imperium, but also as a computer game. I thought it was a lot of fun. But if anyone's tried that, the espionage system in there is much more impactful. You can destroy planets. You can do lots of crazy things with espionage that you currently can't do. Yes, okay, you can get rid of planets by using the larvae on the star, but that is a rare niche edge case. I'd like to be able to assassinate leaders. I'd like to be able to attempt to kill empire rulers. I'd like to be able to attempt to actually use espionage to break up federations properly. Frame one federation member for the assassination attempt of another federation member and then get them going to war with each other. If I was, a super sneaky ultimate espionage-based faction, that would be kind of a wet dream in my opinion. Not just that, maybe we could also actually steal, ships and fleets. We could flip the leader of a fleet and then get that entire fleet over to our side at an opportune moment in a combat possibly. I mean, there's lots of things you could do here with espionage that would give it impact. Then you would need to work on counterplay. That would be the big issue. It couldn't just feel like a big beat stick the galaxy could go around and hit you with, because that would be rubbish, but it does need to have more impact than it has today. That I think is certain we can all agree on. What would you like to see in espionage? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below though. What kind of new espionage project would you add to the game if you could? What about fulfilling player fantasies? Well, the game director has you covered there. Finding different ways of playing the game can be popular. Landless adventuring in Crusader Kings 3, for example, makes the developers wonder what they could do with nomadic fleets in Stellaris. The key question there ends up being, why are they nomadic and how do they interact with more standard empires? Origins could also be opportunities to table flip the normal economic or political models of Stellaris. So not just Nomads, we're also talking about, big changes here to the way you run your economy or the politics of your empire. That is a very tantalizing tidbit that they've kind of left here on the table, mic dropped and walked out with. Nomadic Empire sounds amazing, but I'd also like to hear what their ideas are on flipping the normal economic or political model we have in Stellaris. That sounds very interesting to me. Sadly, there's no more information there and we can only dream, but playable Nomads may be coming soon. Interesting thing, interesting to hear. We heard earlier in this video about a rework to the trade system, how we're going to turn trade into a regular resource. Well, what are we going to do about pirates? What are the developers, more importantly, going to do about pirates? Space piracy is a popular fantasy. They've touched on it a bit with the Treasure Hunter's origin in Grand Archive, sorry, I should say the Treasure Planet origin, but they could mesh well with the Nomads idea we just talked about, or even a factional political expansion. So they could also end up in the faction and politics expansion we also discussed earlier on. Crime and deviancy aren't terribly engaging systems at the moment either. They're just basically annoying things you kind of have to deal with a little bit, but mostly you can pretty much ignore them. They might benefit from wider examination. So this here sounds like pie in the sky thinking compared to what we've previously seen. There's no concretes mentioned here except maybe they should look at it, maybe they should do something about the systems that don't really work. They are noting, the developers, that space piracy is a popular fantasy, but they're not really expanding on what they want to then do about that. What about future species packs? We haven't had a species pack for quite a while, actually. I think the last one was Toxoids almost 2 years ago. We have had some extra port traits added with Machine Age, a cybernetic and synthetic set got shoehorned into that one, but as an actual expansion goes, or species pack goes, we really haven't seen one for quite a while. When it comes to species, the game director could see the developers examining what kinds of life would arise on molten or frozen worlds, much like they did with Toxoids. Like Toxoids, they'd likely need some restrictions on what they can do with those worlds, as they are 10 times more abundant than normal habitable worlds. But this would be interesting to explore. Players often ask for gaseous or energy creatures. I'd really love to see an energy creature species pack. But what does Eladrin have to say about this? Well, the first gaseous are already represented to an extent by the Dathnak, which you can find a gaseous species living on a planet through an event chain. I feel that doesn't really count though, because we can't play as them and we never get to see them and there are no portraits, so I kind of feel that answer is a little bit of a cop-out. Whilst technically accurate, it's not quite following the spirit of the idea, though I do love a technical right answer, I suppose. And the latter is represented by the Unbidden. The game director feels that energy beings may go too far into fantasy elementals. Really? So he'd like to stay away from them if possible. Really? So we can have psychic powers and, you know, the afterlife and spirits and whatnot, but through the necroids, but having energy beings would be too much like fantasy elementals. Where do we draw the line? That's an interesting place to draw the line. Okay. Expanding the existing species phenotypes could also potentially be interesting. For example, a Plantoids 2. You know, I think I'd much rather see a gaseous and an energy creature species pack before I see anything with the word 2 written on it, like Plantoids. Yeah, that's interesting. So basically what I think we're hearing here is that the game director is very keen to examine molten or frozen species packs, though possibly much less keen to examine gaseous or energy creature species pack, which for those of us that wanted an energy creature species pack, I guess we just have to go back to the mods and count our lucky stars, I suppose, that someone wanted to spend a lot of time adding a mod in for that sort of thing. Scenarios are another proposal that the game director has seen a number of times over the years. Would it be interesting to have scripted game modes with custom rules and events already in motion? I, for one, welcome our new scenario overlords. I would love to be able to play as, for example, the Foundation in the Decline of Empire. You don't have to call them the Foundation, you don't have to call them Empire, but Isaac Asimov wrote some cool stuff and I'd like to play it in the damn game, thank you very much. This could lean hard into already established universes with asymmetric starts. Perhaps the game starts off with communications from a xenophile fallen empire that tells you, pre-FTL Earth, "Greetings, dear humans. We were expecting to continue observing you for another few centuries," before making direct communications. but I'm afraid that's not to be. You see, while our pre-FTL policies forbid interfering directly with your development, we've decided that ethically we're required to make an exception so you have a fighting chance. We're transmitting a copy of our technological databanks. Just do your best to hold off the Pretherin Scourge for, say, 20 of your years, and we'll be right back with a new fleet. Okay, so what's going on there? The game director does want to point out that this is hacked together and is an example, and definitely not anything real. Sure, it's not game director, we totally believe you. Anyway, a system like this could allow for changes on narratives that can be completed in a relatively short play session compared to a standard Stellaris campaign, or could otherwise completely change the pace or nature of the game. It could also be used to craft competitive experience. At the last PDXCon, which was quite a few years ago now, they featured mods like the Survival Necroid Invasion, written and created and curated by the lovely Mr. Freak, or Arc of Ascension. And the game director could see things like that fitting into the system. Alternate game modes tend to be fairly binary though. They're either not used very much or they are incredibly popular and not much in between. What kind of things would you want to see in these sorts of game modes, if anything? Personally, I'd like to see a galaxy where there are a variety of different empires at different stages of the game in such a way that we could actively compete, actively play. A galaxy that's kind of partially already fleshed out with some space for us to expand. And a galaxy, therefore, where not every empire has basically the same start as us. You know, we've got all the normal empires, maybe a couple of advanced, and then a fallen empire. We could have a real smorgasbord of different civilizations, kind of like an Ian M. Banks novel, where they're at different levels of ability. You know, we've got the culture who are, I want to say, class 8 or 7 or something, and then you've got all the way down to class 2 and 3. We could start off as a 2 or 3 and work our way up into that 7 or 8. To add a little bit of context to this one, actually, because I have in the past spoken to Paradox developers, Paradox employees about scenarios in Stellaris. A big reason that I was told for why it's something that people don't necessarily want to do is that once you put a scenario in, when you then update the game, when there are new patches and new DLC, you'd have to then go back and update each of the scenarios so that they still work. I tell you what we could do, ladies and gentlemen. We could have it so that those scenarios were set in a fixed version of the game. For example, let's say they're released with patch 3.20, I don't know, 4.5, whatever. Then whenever you want to come back and play that scenario, you have to have the game in that state. Either you have to reload it that way, or when you load up the game, it may give you an option to go to that scenario mode and thus load the game in that configuration for that specific scenario. That way it would never need to be updated. You could always go and play that scenario and enjoy it for time immemorial. Just a thought, but yeah, let's move on. Everything we've just covered is basically a stream of consciousness of the game director himself, and he feels that he has only just scratched the surface of possibilities. He really wants to know, what do you think was missed? Are any of these options, any of these ideas we talked about since we had the red text, since we got onto Developer Diary 364, especially attractive or repellent, and where would you want them to go? You can either leave your comments down in the comment section. You can also head over to the Paradox forum. I'll put a link to Dev Diary 364. You can write your comments there as well. But basically, the game director wants to know what we, the community, think. If you want something done, now you have to go and do it yourself, ladies and gentlemen, and write a comment down in the damn comment section. Otherwise, no one will ever know what your thought was. Thank you if you've stuck with me through what I think has been an enormous video. We've covered so many different areas of Stellaris. I personally think that this is really good news. The developers listening to the community, the developers wanting to know what the community wants, and then attempting to give us that is amazing. This is really, really awesome. And I have to say, after reading this, after having recently traveled out to Stockholm and chatting with some of the developers in person, I have to say I'm very hopeful about the future of Stellaris. I think we're going in a good direction at the moment, and I'm really excited for all of us to explore where that new direction is. If you've enjoyed this video on Stellaris, but you haven't scratched that Stellaris itch, you might want to watch the video on your screen right now. To do that, you just need to click on it.